All right. Well, hello again. It's been a couple days, I think, right? Ooh, here we go. Try to start off a good, thrilling episode. Yep, back in the saddle again. Let's just get back up and keep on going. So, where were we playing last time? I think we'd finished off an idea before. Oh man, I worked and I've sort of hit the wall on my energy levels, I guess. Okay, what do we play with? Stuff tonight. I have some things here that are books that we could use for inspiration, but I don't. That's where I was headed next. I'm trying to remember where I was going next. We have the tier 1 choices are Beetlejuice, Matrix, Edward Scissorhands, Fantasy Island, X-Files, Sabrina the Teenage Witch, Twin Peaks, Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, Greatest American Hero, Quantum Leap, Empire Records, Men in Black, Firefly / Cowboy Bebop, Farscape, we did Stargate, Buckaroo Banzai. Buckaroo Banzai. That should be fun. But I barely remember that movie. I just remember it for being so wacky fun that that's all I remember. We also have things like Weird Science, American Werewolf in London, Poltergeist, Die Hard, Alf or E.T., Knight Rider, Fraggle Rock, He-Man and G.I. Joe, Mrs. Doubtfire, Groundhog Day, Hook, The Sixth Sense, Pretty Woman, Being John Malkovich, Dumb and Dumber, Free Willy. You could do something like Free Willy and just change it up to... I feel like that whole thing has been done. If you change it over to a sci-fi, you could have a kid freeing a captured alien creature. And if you did fantasy, it's a dragon. Yeah, goodness gracious, excuse me. So that's sort of really been done. Fight Club. I don't think I've even actually seen Fight Club. I just know it as a cultural touch point. Matilda. I could kind of go for Matilda. How would we do a Matilda? Matilda's a little of an interesting story. Matilda is not fantasy, but not sci-fi either. Oh, what would you do for Matilda? Let's play with that for a little bit, shall we? Matilda. Matilda is the story of a young girl whose parents are sort of con artists and schemers and anti-intellectuals, and she's sort of in love with learning from books. And and loves her teacher in school. And it becomes a sort of a, trying to think, like somebody had, I think I remember somebody saying something to the effect of Matilda is the children's version of Carrie. And I'm like, that's sort of twisted, but I kind of get it. I don't know that I want to do like an adult horror fiction piece. But the trick is, like, Matilda, like I said, Matilda's not a, sorcery, magic, fantasy creatures. But it's also not science and technology. But it has some of the trappings of the magical science fiction-y genres. So if you took a science fiction direction with it, it's psychic powers, the force, whatever you want to call it. But if you took a fantasy direction with it, it's just kids with magic abilities. And it's not different enough. I think if I were to take this idea a little bit further, what I'd want to do is switch over the power set from an intrinsic effect to an extrinsic. I'm not going to be able to say half the words tonight. Intrinsic versus extrinsic qualities. In Matilda, the story, it is inherently some gift she has that lets her affect the outside world through mental processes. So she can think a thing and make it happen. Now, the alternative to this would be to, you could take a couple routes with this. You could do a befriending plants and asking plants to do a thing, to, instead of moving an object with your mind, you're friends with plants and you can ask them. It's Poison Ivy from Batman. You could also go the route with inventing tools that do things for you. I suppose we could go a magic route too. Like, I don't know how I'd pull that off. Like, if you changed it, like if we talked, like I talked about a minute ago, the idea of the story being either magical or science fiction isn't a huge change from what we already have. If we did something like a magical Matilda, would it be she taps into magic spells or the force of magic around her? Ley lines? You can do ley lines. That'd be an interesting twist. Huh. The other thing we could potentially do with Matilda is we have a story in which a little girl is unique because she has a special ability that nobody else seems to have. What if we flipped that? What if this was a little girl who's in an environment where everybody has a gift and she doesn't? Huh. Like, could we do that right? Like, how would we formulate that? So let's play with that a little bit. So we start out with a world with kids who have special abilities, potentially magic. Magic. But Matilda doesn't. The biggest hurdle I see to this idea is that you're implying at a certain point that kids in a magic schooling system of some kind, we're bordering on Harry Potter already. Kids in a magic schooling system. Kids in a magic schooling system, why would they allow a kid who isn't magical into that schooling system? Maybe they don't let her in? Huh. Okay, if we're doing it this way, and maybe I'll pull in the science fiction aspect of technological genius. Okay, so let's still play with the magic path. So Matilda does she not have any magic at all? This requires asking ourselves, how does magic work in our universe? So we can start with the premise of oh, that's tricky. Okay, so does everybody in the world have magic? Huh. No, I feel like the right thing to do for this approach would be, in this story, Matilda, you have her parents who are utterly unremarkable and unskilled at anything other than pulling con jobs on people. So, what if we set it up that this is sort of like the Rumpelstiltskin story, in which you have a father of a daughter who he makes up stories about her abilities to impress people, and that gets the daughter in over her head. That's not a bad approach. So he's a flim-flam man. He's a fake mystic. And he pulls tricks in order to get what he needs from the population. And he ends up sending his daughter to a place. Oh, what if that is her thing? That feels weird, because it's flipping the idea that her parents are con artists and tricksters and she has legitimate gifts. aside from her love of books, that nobody else has. Now we're going in an environment where everybody seems to have gifts except for her and her family. It makes her more like her family. Where in the original Matilda, she's not like her family because she's an intellectual, gifted person in a family full of scam artists and anti-intellectualists. So she's always at odds with her parents over that aspect. If we do this in a way where she is ungifted, well, I don't want to phrase it that way, but she has no special abilities. She's going to a place where everybody else does. Okay, so with that in mind, I like the aspect of her being a intellectual and a bookworm. So how can we set that up? Her parents are con artists, anti-intellectual con artists. And they've pulled a few magic gags that got them notoriety enough in certain populations that they seize the opportunity to let their daughter attend a school for the magically gifted. Oh, but what's her gimmick? Like, that's the real question there. Like, you go to a school for the magically gifted, and you have no magical talent. Or you can't do magic, but maybe you can be aware of it. You can see it where others maybe can't see it. I don't know. I think it really has to come down to a certain point of how does magic work in your universe? Ugh. Okay, so if we set her up as smart, we set her up as smart in such a way that she's not really scamming. I guess to a certain degree, she's faking out. Because I guess if you really look at it, the original Matilda movie, I don't remember the book, but the original Matilda movie, her parents were the scam artists. But she's sort of like a scam artist too, in the fact that she, I hadn't really taken this view of it before, but she is using her abilities without anybody knowing she has them to scare or manipulate her environment, which, I mean, to be fair, her environment is an abusive, hostile place. She's using her abilities to benefit her goals in secret. So she is sort of doing some of what her parents do. All right, so that's not super bad. Now, if we set it up so that in our setting, magic is part of the world for good number of people. And she's gotten access to this without having any real magical talent. What if maybe if we go back to that idea of intrinsic versus extrinsic magic, where everybody has magic within themselves to use for their gifts and to achieve certain things. And she doesn't have any of that. But being a studious, book-loving nerd can figure out how to tap into the loose, stray magic all around her and make things that use that. So instead of, say, everybody has the ability to throw lightning bolts or use electricity to shed light in a room or something like that, and she doesn't have the ability to make the lightning bolts, but she has the ability to maybe harness the environmental electric energy and use it to light a light bulb kind of thing. It's a terrible example, but I like the idea that she can't cast magic. She can't tap into an internal magic. But everybody around her is shedding stray magic. And she can use a wand or a tool that she crafts with the right materials to funnel that magic to achieve an effect. It's an interesting idea. I think it really sort of still departs from the idea of making her, like in the Matilda movie, she's like, if she wasn't in the movie at all, it was just the rest of her environment and the rest of the story that was going on. You have an environment with utterly no magical or mystical or psychic abilities at all. So the whole world is mundane except for Matilda. If we're flipping this, the whole world that she's involved with has abilities except for Matilda, would be the flip. So it wouldn't be her tapping into the talents of others. It would have to be her negating other people's gifts. I don't feel like that's the story I want to tell. I like the idea of a girl who's harnessing this sort of magical pollution that permeates the environment around her through a little bit of know-how and ingenuity and studying and learning. But she has to be able to fake that she's like everybody else, because that's a key aspect of Matilda, is she fakes being normal. And in this case, normal is a magic user, so she's got to fake it. I feel like the right way to tell that story is to do a very to do a very Rumpelstiltskin story. So you have a bit of a clod of a father who's scamming people and bragging about his daughter being exceptionally gifted, maybe even as part of a scam. And all the while, sort of sneering down his nose at the people who think they're so smart, yet they always fall for his tricks. And in the process, he does the bragging to a person or persons that mistake him for a member of a magic using community and talk about whether his gifted daughter is going to the school for the magically gifted, and if maybe not even phrase it that way, but are so convinced of the prestige and get her into that school, so they do what they need to do to get her into the school, and she is left struggling as a consequence with the fact that she is an ordinary, well, she is a regular girl in a school for the magically gifted, and she's going to have to use some of her parents' techniques to sort of pretend to fit in. And I feel like the thing missing from the original Matilda that we have the chance to do right here is, in Matilda, she's the one with the gifts, and she's the genie that solves the problems of the school. But none of the other kids really have, none of them have a moment of earned importance themselves. I don't know that that's the best way to phrase it, but it's sort of that idea of the kid becomes the Mary Sue. The idea that you have a magical gift more important than anybody else's abilities. And so the story stops involving anybody else. It's all about Matilda at that point. What about any of the other kids? She doesn't make them feel more powerful or empowered. And so I kind of feel like we could have a story here where you have people with mundane, simple magics that are less significant, and she, with her tricksy ways, finds a way to make them more important. So this is sort of like a game that I used to play with people saying, like, okay, come up with a useless superpower and let's see if we could then find a way to make it one of the most valuable resources available to somebody. It's sort of like what some of the older comic books used to do, in that you'd have somebody with powers and you'd have to write a story around making those powers interesting or useful. So you'd have somebody like the Green Arrow, who's literally just somebody who shoots arrows. And like, how do you make a story around this arrow shooting hero? so that their powers make them a superhero. That's sort of what we're looking at doing here. Only we're building a school of super ability or magic ability characters where everybody has a gift, and you have a character whose ability isn't magical ability, but the ability to figure out how to make something useless useful. So that magic pollution that everybody produces, she figures out how to make that useful. Some of her classmates who are like the wimpier or more pathetic magical ability people, she finds a way that they could be the heroes. So it is a little bit of like not necessarily making it how to make Matilda character amazing. It's Matilda putting the wonder and amazing back into magic without having to be magical herself. I think that's an interesting spin to take it for. So now it's sort of like a matter of breaking down what my magic system is going to be for this. And I feel like if we're going to do that idea of some kids are just magically useless, but they are technically magically abled, that you have to sort of almost set it up where what constitutes magic is a limited set of abilities per each person. So I'm debating here whether it's people start out with one magical ability, and that's the only one they can do, which is a possibility because you have the idea of like one of my magic system approaches I was doing for the non-Vancian magic for role-playing games was the idea that you start with a single spell, but you can bend that spell any number of ways with special tricks. So if you start everybody with one set of abilities per person, and it's you can build a hierarchy, like who's the most important person in the school based off of whose spell is the most impressive. And that gives you the opportunity to have the sort of lame spell people made valuable by finding ways to bend their spells in new ways. There's also the possibility of doing something where we could do everybody has access to magic, but only certain spells work for them. And so somebody who can have multiple spells easily versus somebody who has tried to cast any number of spells and most of them don't work for them. It's sort of like, I guess you could call them a, what was it? The Harry Potter word for it is a squib. I don't remember enough of Harry Potter to be able to say that with any confidence, but the idea being you have somebody who can tap into magic, but every spell they try to do doesn't work. They have the potential to do magic, they just don't have the ability. So, I mean, we might even be able to blend those two. I'm thinking of it almost like the Matilda character would be like a lens to somebody unable to focus any real ability. In a school where the people who can focus and achieve a lot with that focus. Yeah, I don't know. I'll have to figure out the right approach to do the magic system for this. And the other path we were looking at, the other path that we mentioned, excuse me, was technological genius. I think in this case, that would be more along the lines of the story of that's a little tricky. If you're to do the technological genius approach, would it be like a Good Will Hunting kind of thing? You would have to. It's imagine like a little Tony Stark from Iron Man. Somebody who can disassemble and reassemble all sorts of stuff in all interesting ways. So how would you frame that as the idea of a school kid with unusual abilities in technology? Oh, actually, one of my favorite books does something like that. It's In Hiding was the first short story that formed the foundations of it. The idea was that you had this kid who's trying completely and utterly to seem as normal as possible. But in the background, he's actually been studying through correspondence courses and has multiple degrees. That's like a 13-year-old kid in school who has multiple degrees in architecture, physics, and astronomy and genetics, because he's able to, pretend to be somebody by correspondence course. And he's taking that sort of character, starting off with that kind of character as the Matilda character, and replacing the special mental abilities. Could we go even further and push it into science fiction? How would we do that? I don't necessarily think we want to go all the way out. Well, we could. We don't want to go all the way out to transporters, like Star Trek transporters. I guess this is sort of like Jimmy Neutron, which was a TV series that I'm barely familiar with. Oh, this is Stewie from Family Guy. That's what this is. This is Stewie from Family Guy. That's what we're doing. Only less matricidal, murderous lunatic, and more just a nerdy kid. Oh, and so if you were to do that, okay, so if we were to do Stewie from Family Guy and had him, who would his parents be? Lois and Peter? that doesn't feel quite right. Like, there is that element that the Matilda parents have no moral fiber. They're scamming people and they're dishonest and crooked. And part of the story was Matilda knowing that about her parents, not wanting to turn her parents in, but not wanting to be a part of what they do. So, who would you have? I mean, you could go into that snake oil salesman kind of thing that we're all facing some of in our current public discourse. Somebody who's, the mother. The mother is one of those people that tells you the healing power of crystals and essential oils, and the dad is one of those people who's always got some. The dad is, what's his name? Oh, like InfoWars. What's his name? Oh, I can't even remember his name because I don't care that much about him. No offense if this is your area of expertise. I don't mean to offend you. But the idea of one of those hucksters selling you the something water filters and the like freeze-dried foods to protect against the apocalypse kind of scam stuff. Like, I can totally see that. But the important thing is here that the parents aren't necessarily believers in those things. They know what they're doing is BS. So it's like a Uri Geller kind of thing, where they're passing themselves off as connecting you to something important when they are undeniably full of BS. And they know it, but it's important for their interests that nobody else knows it. So they're sort of con artists. Yeah, I hope I haven't offended you in any way. So we have the con artists trying to pull that off. They have a child who is, by all stretch and measure, Stewie from Family Guy, with his ray guns and his time travel and his cloning and those types of things. Oh, we could do some really weird stuff with that. And she or he is desperately trying to appear like a normal kid in school. And like the other key factor of Matilda was finding the much put upon dedicated teacher who eventually falls in love with this extraordinary child and wants to have this child be theirs because the child's family doesn't care about the child, sees the child as just a problem they have to lug around, and doesn't recognize the potential of this amazing kid. The teacher does, and wants to give that child every opportunity to realize their full potential. And I think the thing about the Matilda movie that I feel like kind of misses the boat is, like, the whole idea of what the teacher, Miss Honey, and Matilda does is she recognizes the value of Matilda as Matilda. Her smarts, her reading, her moral fiber, her sense of justice. Those are the things that make Matilda an important and interesting character, and what the teacher respects and wants to give the potential to blossom. But the magical ability to move things around with her mind, that's not what drew them together. But it's used as a shorthand for being an extraordinary child. And I think that sells it short. It's a gimmick for the case of the story. It's the Maltese Falcon. It's the object of the story that once it's been used or achieved or whatever, is no longer important to the development of the characters. I think they even say at the end of the movie, and things were so good that she almost never had to use her powers ever again. Like, then why was that the thing that was, like, you made the story about? It feels like a weird split. Like, you sell it as the thing that made her extraordinary and gave her the ability to fight against wrongs. But then once the whole story was set up where she has a new family and she has a new life, it doesn't matter anymore. It's not useful. It's this thing that we made this child able to do that doesn't matter anymore. And I feel like that's the wrong path. Whereas I feel like with both of the things we're doing here, one is the ability that makes them special is the ability to see the value in others and to be able to think of a use for things around you. And the second one is the things that make you extraordinary are creativity and knowledge, not magical abilities. It's interesting those are some very, like, I'm going to talk with my counselor. I'm pretty sure she'll find both of those ideas very enlightening. They do sort of reflect my own mindsets. My tendency to see garbage as useful if you know what to do with it, and my tendency to favor ideas and creative applications for problem solving as a unique and important ability. So I guess that's sort of where I should call it for tonight. We're almost at 50 minutes here. I will play with this a little bit more, and tomorrow's video, I guess, tomorrow, feasibly, will be refinement of these ideas a little bit further. And then we'll maybe see where we're going from there. So, thanks for joining me tonight. I will see you in the next one. And until then, take care and have a good night. I do feel like I'm getting a little hoarse again. No, my voice is getting a little hoarse. I'm not getting a little pony or anything.